Hey, I'm Steven with Kirby Woodworking. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this custom Gibson SG based off of the AC/DC's new album, Power Up. To get this project going, I'm going to print out a PDF of the Gibson SG to proper scale, and I'm going to be tracing it onto a piece of 3/8 plywood. I'm going to use that piece of 3/8 plywood as a template, so I'm going to cut it out on the bandsaw, then do some shaping on the sander. We're going to be using a combination of Wenge wood, so this is black African wood, and we're also going to be using blood wood, so this is red, so it's going to be really nice contrast between the two. We're going to do two separate glue ups, so the piece on the right is going to be used on the guitar body, and the long piece I'm gluing up first is going to be used on the guitar neck. So the one glue up we did with the black wood in the middle and the two blood woods on the outside are going to follow this orientation through the guitar. It's going to follow this electrical channel feed over here, and the reason I'm designing this guitar like that is so now I can put a channel in with the router base through the edge of that before I do my glue up. That's going to help us have an electrical channel between our two pickups into the electrical feed. If we did it the other way, we would have to drill through a finished product, which is a lot more risky. If you're looking at having everything else done and you're putting a drill at an awkward angle through the entire piece of the guitar. Being that this is really rare exotic wood, I was very stingent on how much material I had, so you see me taking a double check to make sure I have the exact layout correct before I do the glue up together. And when I did the final glue up, I only had a couple of centimeters on every side, so I really pinched my pennies on this one. So I've watched other guitar building videos where they use two sides of tape and then they put super glue in between the two of them. But if you want to skip a step in there, you can just use standard double-sided tape. And I've been using the router base on this for the past couple of weeks and it didn't slip once on me. So it's a very solid surface and you won't have any problems. When I take it over to the bandsaw, I'm going to cut within 1/8 of the guitar template. If I go any closer to that, I risk gouging out a piece of the finished product. Also, I don't want to go any further than that because it'll put more strain on the router. I'm taking off a lot of material as is, so I want to minimize that as much as possible. Because this guitar was very thick, I didn't have a bit that was long enough to cut it in one pass. So I started by using a bottom flush bit, and then I switched over to using a top flush bit while flipping the guitar over so I can get the whole thing flush with one another. Now for all the electrical components and the future knobs and dials, you're going to need to make an opening through the back that'll protrude through the front with smaller pinholes. So first thing I'm going to do is take it to the drill press using a Forstner bit. I'm going to bulk out as much material as I can. Then I'm going to use a top flush router bit to clean it all up and make it a nice even cut. So in our earlier video, we put dado coming through the central section over here, and you can see why it's being used right now. We're able to cut out our circuit area that's going to have all of our knobs and dials for the volume output and everything like that. And we have an electrical feed now through that opening that we can now connect the electrical wires to the two pickups that will be here and over here. Now, the Gibson SG design has some curvature along the exterior, so usually when I remove bulk material, I'm going to be using an electric grinder. However, in this case, I just want to use a very minimal rasp. I do have more aggressive rasp, but what I want to do with this curvature is put my hand across it and take individual passes through. In between each pass, I'm actually going to run my hand across it to see if the curvature on the guitar matches the back and make sure that it all flows in with one another. Similar concept before, which I probably could have optimized on the first pass through, is I'm going to reattach the template, which I've recently cut out to have holes for the pickup locations, and I'm just going to have enough room in there and begin to remove that material. Once I'm done removing that material, I'm going to take it over to the drill press and I'm going to put pilot holes through all the locations of the knobs and dials. Now I can take off the template and I'm going to have those pilot holes show me exactly where I need to drill. I'm going to make a cap for the back of the guitar to hide the electrical components in. I'm going to use a piece of paper. I'm just going to trace out the exterior lines, and that's going to give me a reference of what I can cut. Pretty simple process. It's just you have to be very slow to make sure you don't have any large gaps. What I'm doing now is I'm actually threading the guitar so I can put some brass screws into this to hold down this back plate. Now that we're good with the head of the guitar, we're going to put our attention towards the neck. So we have the piece that we cut earlier, and I want to keep it square for this part of the process. To put a dado throughout the middle of the neck, we're going to hide a truss rod in there, and that truss rod is used to counteract the tension that will eventually be put through the strings of the guitar. So you're going to notice that sometimes guitars will start to bow upwards because of that tension, and this truss rod you can tighten and loosen to help level it back out. Similar to before, I'm going to be using the template with some double-sided tape, and I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw. Now this bloodwood was very tough material. I actually snapped 2 blades while doing this cut alone, so we took it very slowly and hope for the best. So we initially cut the neck from a 2D piece, however we're going to now make that template into a 3D piece. Because we have a 13-degree swing on the tail of that neck, we have to make sure that we get the proper ridges on top to be a proper Gibson SG guitar. So in my previous video I used a standard rasp to shape the guitar head. The reason I used a standard rasp in that application was to not remove the bulk too quickly on the guitar. I wanted to make sure that I could feel it with my hand through every pass through, and I would gradually make it in the shape that I want. When I'm shaping the guitar neck now, there is a lot more material. So if I had to remove a lot of material in a standard application, I'd be using an electric grinder. However, in this application, there is a high potential that I could gouge out a piece and then the whole neck would be ruined. So I use a Shinto rasp instead, and this rasp has a lot of serrated teeth, and it allows me to remove the bulk of the neck while still maintaining control. So now I can feel it with my hand as I'm doing individual passes through, and it still is removing a sufficient amount of material that it will not take me a couple of days to shape the entire neck. To shape the neck, you're going to start on either extremes of each end, and you're going to shape each side that you like how it feels. You'll take a couple of depth measurements as well, but really you're going to be wrapping your hand around it to make sure that it feels good. Once you shape both sides, you're going to now connect the middle. So you're going to work side to side while you're using the Shinto rasp, and you're going to make sure that they blend into one another so that you can have a nice gradual slope going throughout the neck. Now this is one of the trickier parts of the build. Between the neck and the guitar there is a 2% slope. So for that I put a couple pieces of shims underneath the template I was going to use with the top flush guided router bit. So once again I bulk out the material and I'm going to be placing a lot of clamps to try to hold this thing together, and similar process to before, I'm just going to be using a router and continually plunging it down approximately 1/8 of an inch at a time until I get to the proper depth I want. So although that was a risky operation, it is a pretty good feeling to have the two fit together very snugly. It would hold in place without the use of glue, but glue is just going to be an added method. Now that the bones of the guitar are good, we're going to put our attention towards the neck. Now you can see I'm putting this template at an angle, and that's to catch the best grain I have in that Wenge wood. The most technical part of this build was the custom AC/DC lightning bolts that I inlaid into the neck. So I'm going to cut the inlays out of bloodwood, and I'm going to use a router set at the proper depth, first to remove the bulk of the material, also to give me a reference on how deep I'm going to go with my chisel. The chisel is not only used to remove the fine material, but it's also used to clean up the edges so that you get a nice sharp feel for the lightning bolt. Just put some glue in there, tap it a couple times with the hammer, and it should fit in there very snug. Now this process probably took me 10 hours alone just to get these inlays in here, so it is very tedious and very difficult. The fret spaces were getting very small at the end, so I didn't have a lot of room to work with, so for the last three I just had to put standard rectangles because no room to put a lightning bolt. Now, an important step is to make sure that you have a 12-inch radius on the neck. So you're going to get a 12-inch sanding radius block. You can just get it from any online store, any guitar store. And you're just going to take a sandpaper and you're going to pass through until you get that 12-inch radius curvature on top. Now that the inlays are done, we're going to start to mark out our fret locations. So once we get the layout complete, we're going to put a piece of tape on top of our Japanese handsaw. And that's going to give me a reference of how deep I want to go with the teeth. Next step is to cap off each side of the fretboard with some bloodwood that we had left over. These are very skinny pieces, it's just aesthetic. To connect this fretboard to the neck, it needs to be very precise. So in order to increase our accuracy, we're going to drill a couple holes while it's all clamped together, and we're going to put some brass rods in there. The reason we're doing this beforehand is if you just do a glue up together, you have a slippery surface of glue between the two layers, and they're going to move while you put more pressure down. So those brass rods are going to hold everything perfectly in place so we don't have any movement once we start to put the pressure down. Now, first step for finishing is to spray a sealer coat throughout the entire guitar. That's going to allow all the loose grains on there to stand up, and you're going to have a prickly surface. So you're going to take a quick pass through with the sandpaper, 320 grit, just to remove all those hairs and get any rough spots and clean all those up before you put the expensive lacquer finish. Now when you're installing the frets, there's a little wedge on the bottom, and that actually just gets hammered right into the slot that you cut out earlier. Once we're done hammering that in there, we're going to use a file to clean up the edges. Then we're going to be using a sanding block longitudinally along the guitar to make sure that there's no high spots or low spots in relation to the frets. Now you can get a special filing tool to crown the top of each fret. However, I found that just using a flathead fret and then using a piece of laminate to make sure I don't scratch the guitar neck work just fine. You just have to be very careful because if that laminate does slip, you will take a chunk out of your neck, and that's a very costly mistake to make, especially at this time. Last step before finishing is just to cut the slots that will hold the strings on the bone nut. We went through a couple passes, first starting with a 90% gloss, which was way too much, then we went down to a 20% gloss, which wasn't enough, and we found the sweet spot at a 40% gloss mix. So in between coats, we're going to leave 5 to 10 minutes for it to set so it can get a little bit sticky and accept the next coat. If we put it on too quickly, it's going to start to run. If we wait for too long, there won't be a proper bond between the previous coat. Now the spraying is done, so we can look towards installing all of the hardware into this guitar. Now I put so much time and effort into the construction of this guitar, I had to make sure that all the components were of high quality as well. So for the pickups, I used Seymour Duncan Vintage Blue pickups. Thanks for watching our video on how we put together this custom Gibson SG. Now we made this as a tribute to my favorite band, AC/DC. We put these custom inlays in here, just hopefully this will get Angus Young's attention so we can get a nice signature from him, but that's a bit of a dream right now, so we'll see if we can make it happen. Now be sure to like this video, hit that alert button so you can see our upcoming progress showing how we put together all of the components, the dials that we picked, along with the wiring that we installed. Now, if you enjoyed this project and you did like it, be sure to see how we put together our jukebox.